morning, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of our 4th foreign language teaching conference, Language Education for Colombia and the World. Yesterday, we had the chance to see Tito Nelson, and I'm sorry, Dr. Oviedo to me, and he talked to us about the enfoque semántico comunicativo, and after that, we heard Maite Mariño Thompson, who talked about trending and new, the words trending and new in the LT world. And today we're going to start off with our very own Tim Marr, who's also from the house. But before that, I would like to tell you a couple of things. The purpose of this event is to elicit the generation of concrete, practical, and innovative solutions to enhance language learning at all levels of education, based on reflection, updating, and the conviction that everybody can learn other languages different from the mother tongue. This 4th version of the conference aims at reflecting on how foreign languages are learned and taught in Colombia and in the world. And this is also a great chance for you, for us, to get inspired and to transform our traditional practice. We urge you to refrain from using your cell phone devices or any other type of electronic devices which may interrupt the normal course of the conference. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Tim Marr, who is a writer, consultant, and teacher in TESOL and applied linguistics. He has a degree in modern languages and linguistics, a postgraduate certificate in TESOL, an MA in applied linguistics, and a PhD in social linguistics. He was director of an MA TESOL program in London for 15 years. He has taught and researched in countries including Thailand, Bosnia, Herzegovina, France, Cuba, Vietnam, India, Uzbekistan, and Peru. He's currently a visiting lecturer at the University of Liverpool in Suzhou, China, and teaches here at Icesi. He teaches in the MA in TEFL. His first book, Why Do Linguistics, was published in 2015, and his new book, called Rethinking TESOL, is coming soon. So let's welcome Tim.
Gracias, Robinson. Voy a empezar entonces. Buenos días con todos. Muchas gracias por venir. Voy a improvisar por un ratico, como dicen ustedes, porque se han extraviado mis apuntes. Y felizmente, más o menos sé qué cosa voy a decir. Entonces voy a empezar de todas maneras. I'm not going to start with that. Voy a hacer lo que hizo mi amigo y colega, el doctor Don Tito, ayer, y voy a hablar en mi inglés nativo. No porque no me gusta hablar castellano, sino que mayormente lo que voy a presentar hoy para ustedes son partes de un nuevo libro que estoy elaborando ahora con mi colega, la doctora Fiona English del Instituto de Educación en Londres. Y todos nuestros apuntes y nuestros datos están en inglés, entonces sería un poco difícil hablar sobre el tema si el original es en inglés, ¿no? Entonces, si no hay ningún inconveniente, y no creo que haya, siendo todos profesores de inglés, voy a hablar en inglés. That still doesn't solve the problem of I don't know what the next slide is, but we're about to find out. Wrong way. Yeah, way backwards. Should I explain the name? No, I won't explain the name of the presentation. I shall go straight into it, and I shall tell you a story. With reference to the whole question of the academic discipline, if it is such a thing, of English language teaching. Excuse me. For part of the year I worked for the University of Liverpool in China, in Suzhou, where we have a joint institution which is a joint venture between Xi'an University and Liverpool University. So it revels in the name Xi'an Liverpool Dashware, with the Liverpool thrown in there so you kind of know what's going on. And this summer, in July, we were doing a course, a colleague and I, for, as it says there, a group of Chinese university lecturers. So they were from, lovely, my safety net has returned. We were doing a course for university lecturers in different disciplines, so medicine, mechanical engineering, business, everything. And the objective was to help train these Chinese teachers to move from teaching in Chinese, which they've been doing all their lives, to teaching in English. Quite a substantial challenge, yeah. And of course, China being China, we said, how soon are these teachers going to have to start delivering all their classes in English? Yeah. And the answer was Monday. We did the best we could. So to get them started, we said, okay, we want to get you used to explaining things in English. So we said, okay, from your own academic discipline, medicine, engineering, law, whatever it was, choose, was it 2 words? Yeah. Choose 2 specialist terms. And what you're going to do is teach these in English to your colleagues. Have you done this kind of exercise? It's called micro-teaching, where you teach a very small group of your peers. And then they laugh a lot, and then they give you supposedly supportive, constructive feedback. Now that's the theory. So we set this micro-teaching exercise up, and we said everybody, we divided them into small groups, and we said, okay, everybody please choose 2 terms. One of the lecturers puts her hand up, said, excuse me, so I went over and I said, yep, what's the problem? And she said, well, I'm very sorry, but she was very apologetic. She was quite embarrassed. She said, I'm sorry, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. My colleagues here, they're all the mathematician, the engineer, the lawyer, they're fine. But I don't know what I should do. I thought, well, why? What's the problem? And she said, that. We don't have any words. So later that evening, my colleagues and I, we started trying to think about this, and we thought, what does she mean by this exactly? And what does it tell you about the way English language teachers perceive themselves? What does it tell you about the way English language teaching is positioned in the academy? What does it tell you about the relationship between English language teaching and other academic disciplines? So we started thinking, okay, what could she have said? What terms could she have chosen? I'm not giving you much time to think about it, but give me some suggestions.
Starting with language?
Starting with language, like, go on then, like what? The word language itself? Ah, sorry, you're way ahead of me, Diana. Sorry, yeah, excellent, yeah. You could start with the word language, couldn't you? You could have different. You could have different, like Tito's presentation yesterday. If you were here, you could talk about semantic communicative. The semantic communicative approach. You could talk about what language actually means. Definitions of language. What else?
Instruction.
Instruction. You mean like pedagogy? Yeah. Interlanguage. Then you'd be getting into the field of second language acquisition. Yeah. Interlanguage. That would be a nice one, wouldn't it? Didactic. Yeah. Do you see already we've taken words from several academic disciplines, and off the top of my head I thought of a few that she could have said. So for example, the first thing that occurred to me was you could just take words from grammar. And of course she was a very highly qualified Chinese lecturer in English, a university teacher of English. She would certainly know her grammar. She would know the grammar better than most native speakers. But no, she didn't. She didn't think of that. If she'd been more inclined towards literature, perhaps she could have chosen words from the field that we very loosely call stylistics. So these kind of words. Yeah? Agreed? If she was a bit more avant-garde, she might have chosen words from the what I've called there the contemporary stylistics or literary textual analysis. So these rather more modern terms like agency. You come across this? When you're reading a text, how, you know, where is the power, where does the power lie in the text? Who has the power to control what is happening? So you could think of things like, for example, the passive voice. If you change a sentence from the active to the passive voice, how does that change the agency? What does it tell you about who is in control of the process? What else might she have chosen? Clearly, she could have gone for something from general linguistics, could she not? Something reasonably familiar, like pragmatics, or something to do with the definition of language, displacement, being able to talk about things that are not present in time or space. Arguably, one of the list of things that defines language as such, rather than the communication systems of bees and dolphins and so on. Or agglutination. You know that word? Come across that? From syntax. You know, languages which are agglutinating. It's a term from language typology. You have languages which are agglutinating languages, which means they build up long strings of suffixes. German is partly agglutinating. Japanese. Quechua is super agglutinated. Turkish. She could have chosen lots of terms from the very wide field of applied linguistics, that is to say, the science of linguistics applied to the solution of real-world problems, including the problem of learning and teaching language, domain, multimodality, CDA. What does CDA stand for? Critical discourse analysis. Or, if reasonably enough, like a lot of teachers, her interest was in the squarely within the language teaching and learning sub-field of applied linguistics, she could have chosen any of these kind of words, could she not? But she didn't. What she said was, oh, I'm just an English teacher. We don't have any words. Which, having thought about it for a long time, I take to mean she did not regard English language teaching as being or belonging to a specific academic discipline in its own right. And she didn't just say, we don't have any words. She said, oh, I'm just an English teacher. I'm a second-rate university teacher. That's to me, that's what I infer from it. You might disagree. Having worked with language teachers for several decades, and specifically with a lot of English language teachers, I have become fairly accustomed to this kind of discourse. And I would suggest that there are a number of beliefs that underlie this ingrained attitude to what English language teaching is, what it consists of. I think the first thing that people assume, or the received idea that people buy into, is that in order to teach a language, you do not need to master a particular body of knowledge. Or to put it another way, the only body of knowledge is the language itself. No other particular academic, disciplinary competence is needed. The language is the body of knowledge. So if you're a competent English speaker and you have some methodological training, you can teach English. That's all you need. Linked to that is the impression that is often given is that there is no content to the subject. And I've actually heard and read language teachers talking about language subjects, English for our purposes, and content subjects, mathematics, history, engineering, all the rest of them. So if content subjects are content subjects, then what are the language ones? There's only one possible inference from that, is there not? There are content subjects and there are zero content subjects, subjects without content. So that when you're teaching students English, or specifically teaching them to speak English, to write a bit in English, you're not really teaching them anything about how language works, or what language is, how language is constituted, or what language can do, or how language is organised. What you're teaching them is the tools that they need to talk about proper, real content subjects that have proper, difficult terms and proper disciplinary cores, bodies of knowledge that you can buy textbooks about. And therefore, as I've already noted, if all of these things are received wisdom, then clearly the conclusion is that in order to teach English, all you need is to be able to speak English and to have some awareness of methodology. Possibly not even that. And I repeat, if it were simply the case that the outside world, the rest of the world, whatever you want to call it, people in general, if it were the case, if it were only the case that this is the view most people have of English language teaching, then we would have a problem. If this is the view that very many teachers have of English language teaching, then we've got a serious problem. And I will contend, and I'll explain why in a moment, I would contend that yes, indeed we do have a serious problem. That this is a view of, excuse me, this is a view of language teaching which has been internalised by language teachers themselves. Thank you, Robert. If you wish to interject at any point, please do. I'm not fuzzy. Also, I don't want to stand here for an hour and a half listening to my own voice. Lord knows I've done enough of that. Okay, so far? I'm not asking you to agree, I'm just asking if you do you follow the logic of the argument so far?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, going backwards again. What does this lead to? It leads to the kinds of problems that beset language teaching, but particularly English language teaching because of the, well, for specific reasons which I'll go into in a moment. It leads to the absence of recognition or reduced recognition for the professionalism and the academic standing of English language teachers. It is horribly common for, and this is, I'm talking about all over the world now, I've seen this everywhere in the world. It is extremely common for, in academic institutions, for the language teachers, the English teachers, to be on a different contract to the content subject teachers. And we all know whether it's a better or a worse contract, don't we? When I said it was different, how is it usually different? I'll give you one guess. You get paid less. Yeah. Have you come across that? Yeah. Some enthusiastic nods there. Yeah. If you haven't come across that, I congratulate you. And I would say only, watch out. Yeah. Wait, because it's coming. It's coming. The outsourcing, the privatising and the selling off of English language departments to private companies to become service departments. It happened in Europe probably 10 years ago. It's happening now in the United States, and it's begun to happen in South America as well. This has been coming for a long time. Partly I would have to say language teachers themselves are to blame for this state of affairs. Sorry, but there it is. We shall come to why in a little while, but I suspect you can already see where I'm going with this. Here's something else that I suspect you might be familiar with. You're familiar with me hitting the wrong button by now? Yes. What people like Adrian Holiday and Suresh Kanagaraja have called native speakerism. Meaning what? Yeah, a preference for native speakers over non-native speakers as teachers. Why? Oh, because she's a native speaker. Her English is wonderful. Yeah, but is she a good teacher? Oh no, but she's a native speaker. Yeah, but is she very well qualified? She's a native speaker. And the systematic reduction of non-native speakers to a second tier. But of course, as I said, this flows naturally and logically from the belief that there is no disciplinary core to language teaching. If we're saying that the body of knowledge is the language itself, nothing else, then yeah, logically the native speaker is better. Obvious, isn't it? It's like being born with a medical degree, or being born with a PhD in civil engineering. It's fantastic. You just walk into a civil engineering company and say, okay, everyone else get out, I'm here now. I was born with this certificate in my hand. But it only works if you agree that language teaching has no disciplinary core. If you believe that language teaching does have a disciplinary core, then you can begin to get yourself into a position where you can fight against native speakerism. Taken to its extreme, and I have spent many happy and depressing hours browsing through internet advertisements for English language teachers around the world. Entertaining and depressing hours. And I will share with you my favourite so far of my little store of English language teaching gold. This is from a website called TEFL.com. Note the associations of the acronym TEFL. This is a beauty. You're going to love this. When you see an ad like that, how does it make you feel about the profession of English language teaching? Undervalued, upset, angry, sad, disappointed. Disappointed is a big one. Yeah. Yeah. I swear to you that I hit the right. No, is it that? I'm holding it the wrong way around. That's what it is. I'm a slow learner. I'm sorry. I beg pardon for the repetition, but I'll say it again. Language teachers themselves are partly responsible for this miserable state of affairs. And it's partly because teachers are often very reluctant to take hold of and own their own discipline, the discipline of applied linguistics. That is to say, and I'll give you the definition again, the study of language, linguistics, applied to real-world situations. In our case, the real-world situation being the teaching and learning of English. Teachers often tend to just brush aside the disciplinary core of knowledge of language. The wider society does it, teachers themselves do it. Not all, obviously, but a very large number. I would argue that, in fact, if we were to define what the field of competence, the field of expertise of an English language teacher is, well, any language teacher, I won't keep repeating that, but you take my point. English is the main player in town, really. I would argue there are three main areas of competence, areas of expertise. One is, of course, the language itself. Does that mean that your English has to be perfect? No, of course not. Does it mean that you have to speak English without a Colombian accent? No, of course not. As Maite mentioned yesterday afternoon, accent is simply not, everybody has an accent. Native speakers have an accent. It's just, again, because of the because there are so many myths and received ideas about language floating around in the society, people tend to miss this point. And one of the myths is that native speakers somehow have this marvellous capacity to speak without an accent. Again, if you were born a native speaker, this is a wonderful thing. It's like whenever I go to the United States, people think that I speak like the Queen of England. No English person thinks that I speak like the Queen of England. I once gave a conference in India. Afterwards, I was interviewed by I was with my colleague Fiona again, who I write with. And we had an interview with the editor of a newspaper called The Hindu. And he was like a lot of middle-class, upper-class Indians. He'd been educated in English, and he was very keen on English. And while Fiona and I were talking, he was clearly ignoring everything that we were saying. He wasn't listening in the slightest. And he said, "Oh, I love listening to your English." He said, "It is like honey dripping into my ears." Which sounds a bit weird, actually, doesn't it? But anyway, that's slightly, especially if you're in bed at the time. Anyway, I'll get that idea out of my head. But it was quite, and Fiona, of course, just exploded with laughter because, as I say, when I meet other British people, they don't go, "Oh, your voice is like honey." They go, "Oh, Tim, you've got a funny accent." Everybody has an accent. It's just that sometimes the ideologies and the received beliefs around language obscure this fact. Again, the myth of native speakerism suggests that native speakers always speak correctly and standardly. It's a nonsense. Of course they don't. Obviously they don't. So, the language is part of the field of expertise of the language teacher. The language itself, but in all its variety, not an idealised native speaker variety of it. Clearly, you're going to need some pedagogical principles. Some idea of how to organize language learning, how to organize a class of learners, how to plan, how to grade language for difficulty, and so on. All the stuff you learn when you're doing a training course in language teaching. The problem with language teachers is they tend to get obsessed with methodology. It's always methodology, methodology. In fact, methodology really is kind of neither here nor there. People have been learning languages for thousands of years. They seem to have managed okay up till now. But language teachers, they tend to fixate on methodology. I'm looking for the most efficient way of teaching. I'm looking for the most effective way of teaching. And I suspect that is because the real core, the real disciplinary heart of language teaching, knowledge of language itself, is missing. So English language teachers try and fill this hole with methodological knowledge, methodological approaches. So there are two parts to the equation, and the third one, you will not be surprised to hear me say, is knowledge about language. What do history teachers know about? History. Do they get obsessed with methodology? No. Have you ever heard a history teacher talk about methodology? Ever? Oh, I've got a fantastic idea this week. I'm gonna split the class into three, and this lot are going to pretend to be Incas, and this lot are going to pretend to be Romans, legion. No. History teachers know about history. They're confident in their own academic discipline. What do maths teachers know about? They know about maths, don't they? They know about numbers. A lot. They love numbers. They love numbers. What about music teachers? How much do they love music? What do they talk about? Music. What do they do when they go home? They play music. They love music. But you go into the staff room of any school or university or particularly private language institution, and you talk to the language teachers. You say, wow, you're really interested in language? No, not really, no. I've got a great book on linguistics. No, you're okay. Oh, I heard a really interesting thing the other day on the bus. I heard somebody say, no, I don't need to listen to that. Language teachers who are not interested in language. I've met hundreds of them. I've met thousands of them over the years. Language teachers who are not interested in language. So, if we are to insist, and again, I'm not forcing you to agree with me, I'm asking you to agree with me, I'm trying to persuade you. You might violently disagree, fine. But if it's the case that in order to be a successful, effective language teacher, you need to have some knowledge of language, not just be a fluent English speaker who once did a methodology course. If we're arguing that you should have some knowledge of language, then how much knowledge? What are we talking about? heavy, you know, it makes your arm ache. Okay so far? All right, what am I suggesting? Language teachers need to know something about language. What exactly? What's the basic minimum? What's the least we can get away with? What do you need? Do we need syntactic theory? This kind of thing? That's an extraordinary piece of timing, Dr. Don Tito. So I was just about to say, there's nobody in this room who actually can understand any of this. And then Tito walked in. Splendid.
Shall I tell you what that means?
Yeah, no. How are we enjoying it so far? I see little delight etched on faces around the room. So, the good news is, no, you don't need any of that. If you do have a PhD in theoretical linguistics, like Dr. Tito, then excellent. But most people don't, and you don't need it. We're not talking about the kind of technical theoretical linguistics that scares the life out of most people. Remember, we started with the idea of to which disciplinary community do ELT teachers belong? ELT teachers are firmly within the discipline of applied linguistics. I say again, not theoretical linguistics, but linguistics applied to real-world contexts, in this instance, the learning and teaching of foreign languages. The kind of linguistics that I would suggest is necessary is the kind of basic toolkit of linguistics that enables you to engage with language as it is used from an informed position. Looking at how language is used, looking at the kind of language people use, how the language functions in society. And you'll notice here two of my favourite words: curiosity and noticing. Language teachers should be curious about language. They should notice interesting things about language and have a basic toolkit of linguistic knowledge which enables them to analyse and process and in the end elucidate these matters to their students. So this is what we're calling the toolkit. And that's the aim of it. A way of moving away from the excessive formalism of teaching a standard language through a course book and beginning to engage to some extent with how language actually works. Why? I'll tell you that in a moment. So what the toolkit would consist of, I would suggest, certainly a basic training in phonetics, articulation of speech sounds, the how and where of articulation. Has everybody done a bit of that? If the answer is no, then you need to think about what I said right at the beginning. What is the expertise of a language teacher? If you cannot describe how a sound is made, where in the mouth, and how are you ever going to be able to understand how speech sounds work? How are you going to understand the errors of your students? This is your bread and butter. Like numbers for a mathematician. This is the basics. I'll say it again. What do history teachers know about? History. What do maths teachers know about? Maths. What do music teachers know about? Music. Why is it that language teachers don't know about language? How on earth did that happen? Phonetics on its own is lovely and it's great fun, but it doesn't take you any further than your dentist could take you, or a speech therapist. It's purely physiological. It's how sounds are made. The bit where the linguistics comes in is phonology. What is the sound system of the language? How do the different phonemes of the language fit together? Do you know what a phoneme is? Do you know what a phoneme is? Yes or no? Okay. A basic training in phonology would tell you how the phonemes sit together or fit together. And if you're teaching Spanish speakers, then it will be particularly helpful to understand how the phonology of English differs from the phonology of Spanish. Where are you likely to get interference and where are problems likely to arise? And as I've mentioned to some of you before, a basic grasp of phonetics and phonology is absolutely fundamental if you work with Spanish speakers. Why? And as some of you will know, who I've worked with before, I have spent ages trying to interest Colombian and Peruvian teachers of English in phonetics and phonology, and specifically the International Phonemic Alphabet. And I get resistance, I get smouldering anger, I get silent resentment. Why are you making us learn all this? Why do we need this nonsense? The answer is because you think you don't. Because if you're a Spanish speaker, and if your students are Spanish speakers, you are brought up with what is called shallow orthography. That is to say, the correspondence between speech, sounds, and writing is virtually one-to-one. What you see is what you get. So Spanish speakers, from a very early age, from as soon as they begin to learn to write and read, they begin to be lulled into a false sense of security about writing and sound. They think, yeah, this is easy, this is great. What's difficult about this? El perro, wow, fantastic. La casa, whoa, yeah. I don't need to know any more than that. And then you start learning English. Or worse, French.
Yes.
And you suddenly find out that not all languages have the one-to-one correspondence. Spanish speakers always think that the alphabet is their friend. The English alphabet is not your friend. It is a potential enemy to be engaged with and carefully, always taking one step back to make sure it doesn't get too close. The alphabet in French hates you and wants to kill you. But Spanish speakers always think the alphabet is their friend. And therefore, Spanish-speaking teachers are very reluctant to engage with the international phonemic alphabet, and they think, I don't need that. You do need it. That's why you need it. You don't really need it in Spanish because Spanish is already a fairly phonemic spelling system. English is not. So, you don't need the full international phonetic alphabet with all its hundreds of symbols and all the weird and wonderful clicks and buzzes and that Tito was demonstrating yesterday, that he used to practice at 3 o'clock in the morning. Or the Arabic pharyngeal fricative. Or the Quechua ejective consonant. Bam! Chay. You don't need any of that. It's all good fun, but you don't need it. What you do need is a grasp of the 40 or so basic phonemes of English. And everybody goes, oh, they're so difficult to learn. We go, no, they're not. You could learn them in an afternoon. You need some grounding in syntax, basics of structure. You need some socio-linguistic awareness. So, for example, what is a standard language? What is the relationship between a dialect and a standard dialect? What's the difference between correctness and appropriacy? You need some macro-sociolinguistic awareness of the kind that Maite was referring to yesterday. Particularly, as we're going to see, the huge imbalance between the numbers of native speakers of English and the numbers of non-native speakers of English. This is crucial. Some awareness of how speaking and writing differ. That is to say, writing is not just speech written down. Speech is most certainly not writing read out loud. I spoke to a teacher this time last year at your place, actually, Angela, if I remember correctly. And I said, what do you, for your speaking exam, what do you give the students? He said, well, I asked them to write a description of themselves. And then they have to memorize it and say it out loud. Let me just say that again. I said, how do you assess your speaking? What's your speaking exam? And he said, well, first, the students write... Whoa! Stop right there. They write something in complete sentences with full stops, and then they memorize it, and then they read it out loud. Now, that's a test of something. It's not a test of speaking. It's a test of pronunciation, maybe. Could be a test of memory. Could be a test of textual composition, like Tito was saying yesterday. These are all good tests, and these are good things that we want our students to do. But it's not a test of speaking. Some linguistic awareness of the difference between speaking and writing will help teachers to avoid enormous elephant traps like that. Mistaking one thing for another. How do you avoid mistaking one thing for another? You need some linguistic, you need some of the body of knowledge of your discipline and of your profession. In terms of speaking and writing, you would need some basics of critical discourse analysis, and you would need some basics of conversational analysis. How do people really talk? This is the kind of thing that you will never find in a textbook. That's why the teacher needs to be the language expert, to fill the holes. I would argue that teachers need some basic awareness of register and genre. And again, this relates to what Tito was saying yesterday afternoon. What's going on in a text? In what circumstances was it written or spoken? What's the relationship between the participants in the text? How is the text organised? Why was it organised in this way and not in this way? For students, this kind of approach is fantastically productive. You're actually teaching them something about language, about the way language works. Teaching them something about their own language, about language in general, human language. But in order to do it, you need to be a confident teacher. That is to say, confident in the basics of the disciplinary area within which ELT sits. And as Maite referred to yesterday evening, almost in these same words, definitely some intercultural awareness, but intercultural awareness of a constructive, modern kind, not cultural information about native speakers of a language. What did she say? That British people eat fish and chips? Right. Fine. We do. So, I mean, well, this is a nice little nugget of information, but it doesn't get you very far. As Maite said, what you need is intercultural awareness. That is to say, some awareness of how culture works through language in general terms, not in terms of individual national stereotypes. Does this seem like a long list? I could make it a lot longer. I found a book the other day, a report really, not a book, written in 2000 by two applied linguists called Fillmore and Snow. This was commissioned by the United States Department of Education, and they said, what should teachers know about language? and these two applied linguists were contracted to think about it and come up with a report. This is what they came up with. This is for all teachers. This is not for language teachers. This is what Fillmore and Snow, for the US Department of Education, suggested that all teachers should know about language. Check this out. And there's more. I won't give you the whole list, but there's more. This is what they suggested. All teachers should know the very basics of language knowledge for all teachers in American schools. Are we saying that language teachers should not even have this? I would say for language teachers, this is the bare minimum. Okay. How am I doing for time, do you know? Okay, what time do you... Yeah, perfect. Okay, so I've been bashing you over the head for the last hour about why you need to know all this stuff. Sorry, about what you should know. But why? And why now? Why suddenly is everybody talking about this? Everybody. Why are some of us talking about this? Some lonely souls. Why are we talking about this? And why does it apply to English teachers, but Arabic teachers, Greek teachers, French teachers, not so much? Why? Partly it's because just the sheer scale of English, but more specifically it's about how the sheer scale and reach of English affects the way English is used. In itself, this is nothing new. I've got a rather lovely first edition of a book which I found in an old second-hand bookshop in Cambridge. And it's called Language, Teaching and the Linguistic Sciences. And it was by the legendary M.A.K. Halliday and two of his colleagues. This was written in 1964. So for at least half a century, linguists have been saying, look, language teaching needs to have a core of knowledge about language. People have been saying it for half a century. So this is not new. But it's now becoming urgent. And it's becoming urgent because the way English is taught, to a very large extent, in very large parts of the world, does not fit anymore with the way English is used. The way English is used has changed dramatically, even in the last 20 years. English language teaching has changed a bit. The attitudes and opinions of language teachers have changed hardly at all. So what's crucial is that people notice, I'll use that word again, notice what is happening with the language. As was mentioned yesterday, the primary use of English, not one of its uses, the primary use of English is as a global lingua franca. As Maite said yesterday evening, in Colombia that fact is only filtering through very slowly. Very slowly. And in large parts of Latin America, for the reasons that Maite explained yesterday, people still haven't realised that it's not a question of learning English as a foreign language in order to speak to people from the United States. That view is 30 years out of date. And because of the peculiar sociolinguistics of the Spanish-speaking world, where you do have these enormous regional blocks, like everybody here speaks Spanish, everybody here speaks Portuguese, everybody here speaks English. Because that is such a monolithic, or apparently monolithic model, you don't realise what has been sneaking up very fast for the last few decades. That this is not the way the world works anymore. And the world that your students go out into is going to change even faster. Here in Cali and in Lima and in Cusco, again and again and again, I overhear, because I listen to what people are saying, I'm curious about language, I'm nosy. I listen to people speaking, I listen to what language they're speaking, I listen to what they're saying. And again and again and again, I hear local people hearing tourists speaking English and assuming that they must be from the United States. Or assuming that they must be native speakers of English. They almost never are. They could be Israeli, they could be Dutch, they could be Algerian, they could be absolutely anything. The fact that somebody speaks English these days has no relation to what country they come from. The native speakers of English are a smallish minority. And in most interactions in English, and I said this on this stage 2 years ago, in most interactions in English in the world today will not involve any native speaker. The native speakers are just not there. So don't assume that the idea of language teaching is to help your students to interact with native speakers. And again, yesterday the question of assessment came up. And here we're still using the Common European Framework. You look at the Common European Framework, and you look at the criteria for each band, it's all modelled on native speakers and being able to understand native speakers. So at this level, you will be able to understand a native speaker speaking quickly. You will be able to understand native speaker colloquialisms and blah, blah, blah. No, this is way out of date. But as Maite said yesterday, unfortunately, the assessment has not yet caught up. It's changed, it hasn't evolved, it hasn't developed at the same speed as the language. But it will, and you as the teachers, you will need to be at the forefront of pushing this agenda forward. Because this is happening, whether you like it or not. You get a lot of resistance from language teachers to this kind of thing. Language teachers often tend to be very concerned about correctness and standardness, and fair enough. If your hobby is being correct and standard-like, then that's great. And of course, students have to pass exams, fine. And until the assessment catches up with reality, you're going to have to teach them correct, in inverted commas, standard English, fine. But the change is coming. And you need to be at the forefront of the change. People who haven't travelled a great deal often have entirely unreal conceptions of what supposedly native speaker countries and cities are actually like. In London, where I live, there are probably, in local schools where I live, students will come from maybe 100 to 150 different language backgrounds. That's completely normal. In the street where I live, there are probably 100 houses, and I would say I probably know of 4 or 5 other native English speakers in the street. Everybody else is a first language speaker of another language. So in my street, most language interaction is lingua franca interaction. This is in the heart, well, not in the heart because I can't afford to live in the heart of London, but this is 4 miles from the heart of London, where native speakers like me are in a minority. ELF, English as a lingua franca, or English as an international language, global English, whatever you want to call it, it is a reality. It's just that it's not yet apparent in South America that it's a reality, but it is. And this is the world that these students will be going into. Even if they never leave Cali, even if they never leave Colombia, you still have to prepare them for lingua franca interactions in English. And that means, again, I'll issue the caveat once more, yes, of course we have to get the students to pass exams. But it also means thinking beyond that. At some point, I would suggest from as early as possible, you need to start exposing students to not just the English that they come across in the textbook, but also non-native and non-standard Englishes. It also means that part of the deal, part of the toolkit, in fact, of knowledge about language that you need, is teaching your students about how to succeed in lingua franca communication. Accommodation, negotiation of meaning, paraphrase, asking for clarification, altering the register, choosing your words differently. All of these things are as important as knowing the standard English words. Because it might be that you've been an excellent teacher and your student knows all the standard words and pronounces them beautifully. But if they can't communicate with the other person because the other person's English is of a different kind, then what's the point? You are preparing the students not only to pass exams, but you're preparing them for global lingua franca interaction. This is new because there has never been this linguistic situation before in the history of the world. The only thing that it's remotely similar to is Latin in medieval Europe. And that would have been roughly the same. You need to work with these kind of Englishes. You need to be confident enough to work with these kind of Englishes. You might well need to persuade a suspicious and resentful institution or a manager that this is what you should be teaching, because there is a lot of resistance to this. A lot. You're going to need to be skilled and confident in order to deal with the new reality. How do you develop this skill and confidence? It's by owning your own discipline, of accepting and acknowledging and embracing the fact that there is a core, a disciplinary core to English language teaching. It is not enough simply to be able to speak English and to have a grasp of methodology. There is a disciplinary core that you must own, because the change is coming, and it's coming very fast. Once you develop the confidence to break free of the native speaker only model, you can get fantastic results. And I'll give you a very, very brief example of a very small example of what I mean. Okay, let's see if this works. Who do you usually use as models in the classroom? What do you usually find in the textbooks? Americans, Brits, Australians, blah, blah, Madonna, Nicole Kidman, blah, blah, blah. How about Shakira? I've got no volume. Volumen, por favor.
Check the computer volume.
Luckily, this video goes on for 25 minutes, so we should just relax. You know, we're not in a rush.
Today, we are honoured to have Shakira added to those illustrious ranks. One of the world's greatest performers, Shakira has had the most successful song in the 21st century to date and topped the charts in over 55 countries. She's won 2...
This is great fun already, isn't it? I mean, this is fantastic. Now, go on and listen to Shakira speak in English.
Who will we be? What challenges can we overcome? How will we live? I have a fantasy about this future, and I wanted to share it with you today. Let me put it this way. If civilization were a car, we would have been cruising at 20 miles per hour for millions of years, only to hit light speed in the last 100.
So, I mean, it's terrific, isn't it? She's a fabulous speaker. She's extremely articulate. She's very engaging. Is there any reason why you would use Madonna or somebody in preference to Shakira? Is there any reason? None. None at all. She's got a bit of an accent, so what? I've got a bit of an accent. Everyone's got an accent. It simply doesn't matter. If she makes some non-native speaker errors, so what? Who the hell cares? She's a terrific model of what non-native speakers can do. So this is fairly uncontroversial, right? You could persuade your bosses to let you use non-native speaker models, right? In China they won't. I tried this in China and they said, no. And I said, why? To motivate your students, why don't you show them models of Chinese people speaking English? They said, no. Why? Because this is China. Okay, fine. So, this is fairly uncontroversial. Now, let's try another one.
You recognise this old man here? Peter's Mike. Oli u nas sobie chyba Randy, welcome. Finley. No, Gary.
Let's take you into your dressing room for the first time. You've not been to Old Trafford before
No,
tonight.
I never
This is your very first time.
Yes, my first time.
Go on then, after you. What do you think?
It's amazing.
Why? What makes it amazing?
It's the same like the TV.
Come and have a seat. This used to be Patrice Evra's head. What is your name? What should I call you? What do you like to be called?
I like call me Falcao because Rodamel was my father. My father's name. No, it's not my surname. Some people thought or think that is my surname, but no, it's my second name.
How excited are you about this move to Manchester United?
I'm so excited. I always worked to arrive a club like this. This club fight for the Premier League. This year we play the Champions League, but every year fight to win the Champions League also.
You're one of the biggest names.
Okay. Sorry, I've got an annoying buzz there. Okay, so Shakira, that's pretty uncontroversial. What about Falcao? Is he a good model of communicating in English or a bad model of communicating in English? It's a superb model, isn't it? Isn't he brilliant? Isn't he brilliant? He quite clearly, at that point anyway, was a real beginner in English. Real beginner. But look how he tried. He was using every trick in the book. He was looking for words. He was locking onto his interlocutor. He was trying to say things in different ways. And did you see the way he seized? Most people, if they're really struggling with the foreign language and they're embarrassed, you just say the minimum. But he spoke, not fluently. I wouldn't say fluently, but he held the floor for that last period. That's about 25 seconds or something. I mean, that is not bad. I would say as a model of what you can do with lingua franca English at a very basic level, I would say he's a terrific model. Fabulous model. He's a natural born communicator. And I'm guessing he's an excellent linguist. I have tried to suggest and it's not only me, lots of people are doing this, I have tried to suggest this use of local English-speaking models in lots of countries around the world, and it almost always meets with resistance. People don't like doing it. They say, no, we should only offer our students correct, standard English. Nonsense. The head of department, the Chinese head of department, who said, no, this is China. Why did she do that? She said that because she was firmly within a 2,000-year-long tradition of Chinese education, which holds that the job of the teacher is to present the very best models. More importantly, she was utterly and completely ignorant of any language knowledge. She had no language knowledge at all. And she was the manager of the language department. She happened to speak very good English. Therefore, she was head of the language department. The only way that is going to change is if the Chinese teachers in her department take for themselves the disciplinary knowledge of language and say, no, I'm sorry, comrade head of department, but we are the experts and we think it would be fantastic to use Chinese English-speaking models for reasons of motivation, in order to show students what you can do with very limited resources, in order to illustrate communicative techniques that are available to everyone, blah, 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 blah. You can only do that. And you can only face down the resistance from people who know nothing about language if you have the knowledge of language yourself. If you don't own the disciplinary knowledge in the way that we talked about right at the beginning, you'll never do it. And you will always be pushed to one side by people who know less than you do. So, you know more about the local situation than I do, but I would suggest that one possible way forward, there needs to be an overhaul, particularly of assessment, because everything begins from assessment, really, doesn't it? And comes backwards. The way Maite said yesterday, assessment will change in the long run, but it's not changing very quickly. But this post-Anglophone, post-native speaker English is coming. There's no way back. Not now. there is growing involvement amongst academic linguists with trying to bring linguistics into school curriculums. In the UK, there's an association called the Committee for Linguistics in Education. I would hope that something similar could happen here. People who do have the language knowledge need to be organising seminars and language awareness raising sessions for teachers. This has to be an ongoing process of education. Most certainly in the way that Fillmore and Snow suggested for the United States, the need, at all levels of teacher training and teacher education, teacher development, language study, applied linguistics needs to be at the very core of it. At the very core of it. And another area I would say to look at is MAs. You could offer MAs aimed at local teachers that have a really substantial element of applied linguistics to them. I'll leave you with one last story. This was now where was this? This was Suzhou again. And my colleague and I were doing a course for university lecturers who were working in English for academic purposes. So on day one, we started talking about the absolute basics of EAP. The sociolinguistics of it, the English-speaking university, English as an international academic lingua franca. We talked a bit about genre, we talked a bit about register, how do historians write, how do civil engineers write, how do mathematicians write, how do you express disciplinary knowledge through language, the usual Ken Highland sort of thing. Ken Highland, who was here 2 years ago, last time I was in. So we thought, okay, this should be fine. And then in the coffee break, an Australian guy came over and he said, I was kind of hoping there would be something a bit more practical. I said, well, it is practical. It is practical. You're teaching EAP. How on earth are you going to teach EAP if you don't know what register means, if you don't know what genre is? Of course it's practical. And he went, no, I mean really practical. He said, it is practical. You cannot effectively teach EAP if you do not know what is meant by genre or register. And we had this long argument. And in the end, he went, look, fellas, we're going to have to agree to disagree. Excuse my rotten Australian accent. And he said, the thing is, you guys, language is your thing, but it's not my thing. I just want to help my students. Language is not my thing. You're an EAP teacher in a university. Have you ever heard a music teacher say, music is not my thing? Have you? Have you? Have you ever heard a maths teacher say, numbers are numbers, man, that's not my thing? Have you? No, of course not. I rest my case. If you want to follow this up, I highly recommend these two books. And there's one copy of the other one remaining. Snap it up quick. I don't care if you read it, but buy it, please. There's your references. Thank you very much for your attention.
questions?
Yes.
Yes, questions? Uh-oh.
No, it's me who's supposed to say it.
Mike. Here, here. Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
Tim, I'm not a native speaker of English anyway. When I think about exposing our students to different models,
Sí.
they are right from the beginning, I'm afraid they might feel uncomfortable and not very secure about where they're heading. So, for me, it's fine after a little while, after they have got some basic.
Yeah.
Now, are you here?
Yes.
Okay. After they have studied and learned and similarly some basic principles of language, your thing, my thing, our thing, we might begin introducing different kind of speakers just to say, okay, you need to feel safe with your knowledge in order to be able to become autonomous. Okay.
Okay, first, broadly, I agree entirely, and that's why I said we should expose students to non-native and non-standard varieties as early as possible. I didn't say from the beginning, I said as early as possible, and I would include in the judgment of when students are ready would be how they are feeling about it emotionally, psychologically, do they feel secure? So yeah, I don't disagree. I do though think that the earlier the better, and I do think very small things like negotiation of meaning, asking for clarification, pausing, hesitating, things like that can come in really very early. And I would also say that the more confident the teacher is with their own disciplinary knowledge, the more likely they're going to be able to judge when the students are ready. It all rests on teacher language knowledge. But yeah, essentially I agree with you. You can't do it from day one, but you can begin to move towards it from day one.
Okay, one more thing. You were talking about music, and I should add singing. Have you heard this? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Okay. Yes, I've been left speechless. Thank you.
I already have one.
Yeah, please go ahead.
You mentioned that the Common European Framework is mostly for learners to understand and to communicate with native speakers. I do know that Pearson has been working in the global scale of English. Is there another reference out there besides?
I'm not an expert on this, I'm afraid. I wouldn't know, but I do know you're right though. I know work is being done on this. When it's due to appear, I really know. I'm sorry, I don't know.
But it's not the one by Pearson that is already out there. It's a different.
Well, no, I'm not talking about that one. No, I think there will be a new common European framework at some point.
But done by the European Council as well.
Correct.
Okay.
I'm assuming. As I say, I'm not an expert on this, but that's what I assume.
There is an American framework. It's called ACT-FL. ACT-FL.
It's already out there?
Yes, you can look it up. You can Google it up, and it's a different kind of a framework, but it also offers.
But it's taught for the speakers or for the teachers?
To understand the progress learners are making it. It has something about 5 C's of communication, and it is pretty explanatory. It's used in the US. Huh?
Can you tell me the name again?
ACT FL, ACT, and then FL. It's the American framework, similar to the Common European Framework.
Okay, thank you very much.
Well, I think the truth of all these things, and Mighty said it yesterday, is these things actually happen quite slowly. The lag between the change in the way the language is used and the way in which assessment and curriculum design is done, it's a very long lag. Yeah, here in the... Oh, sorry, do go ahead.
Well, it's just a comment about something you were mentioning has to do with native speakers rather than non-native speaker teachers. And it based on the experience I have been living there in my university, in Chico, I'm working here. And well, it's because I think it has to do, you correct me if I'm wrong, probably I'm not really concerned, but I think it has to do with much more with state government policies here in Colombia. Because well, I think the educational authority, Minister of Education, they bring, we working on bilingualism in Colombia, and I guess they are bringing some native speakers.
They're bringing native speakers. Yeah, I know.
Those native speakers, the most of the time, they don't even know how to
no,
teach the language.
of course not.
Yeah, because they're native speaker.
Yeah.
So, yeah, maybe there has not to do with...
And this, I mean, those of you who have heard me before will know that I am repetitious about this to the point of boredom. I find it extraordinary that ministries of education can take decisions like this without consulting linguists about it. And it's because, as Goethe pointed out 250 years ago, everybody has an opinion about language. Everybody's opinion is as good as everybody else's. It's extraordinary. I mean, can you imagine if the government sort of said, okay, let's tell you what, let's buy 2 new aircraft carriers and 10 new ships, 10 new destroyers. Right, shall we ask the admirals of the Navy about it? No, it's all right there. Well, what do they know? I mean, ships are big, ships float. What do you need to know? I mean, let's get together ships. It's extraordinary. It drives me insane. And the only way, and you're making my point for me, and I thank you for that. The only way this can be resisted is if language teachers own their own discipline. And they say to the managers and the Ministries of Education and all the other people who have their amateur opinion, say, sorry, no, I'm a language specialist, we are language specialists, and we say, and we're language teaching specialists, we do have a specialism, we do have an academic core, and we are saying, sorry, Minister, you're wrong.
Yes, you're wrong. You see, my university, at this time, we have 2 foreigners, the American teachers, and well, they're teaching there, you see, but they don't know how to teach. They just speak English perfectly, and that's all.
Well, you say they speak English perfectly. Well, they speak English. I mean,
they're speakers. Yeah, but, you know, they don't have pedagogy methodology, and so they got into the classroom, and the students are like, what
yeah, what's good? Yeah, absolutely.
They don't have any idea about
and not only is it bad for the students in the sense, or potentially bad for the students, or unhelpful, it's also seriously undermining for the teacher. It implies that there is a ranking of quality in language teachers from the native speaker to the non-native speaker. And it's disastrous.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Well,
Good morning.
I have on one side one question and maybe a suggestion. I would like to know if you can give us a hint about how to use multimodal practices for language teaching under an intercultural perspective.
Did you say multilingual practices?
No, multimodality. You spoke about
multimodality. Not really my area at all. I merely picked out the word multimodal as an example of a specialist term. I didn't mean to imply that it was my specialist term. Shall I make something up on the spot, or shall I just politely? Oh, I'm thinking aloud. I'll politely decline. No, sorry, it's not my field.
Well, it's fine. Just basically, multimodality is the analysis of the visual communication, visual signs, and all the paralinguistic elements.
Yeah, no, I know what it is. It's just it's not my field.
And hence, my suggestion would be to, I don't know, call the attention to universities and academic institutions to boost this novel trend in order to help us as language teachers, because currently we have to deal with this every day in our classes. Students are more engaged with pictures and
moving images and stuff.
And even we could...
sorry to interrupt you, I was just going to say that in fact, when is it you two are doing your... tomorrow? Tomorrow there will be a presentation on this, on a digital link-up between here and State University of New York, which I think you might find interesting. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, well, because my suggestion would be to use this in order to tackle some social issues about justice, inequalities, and all that kind of stuff that we must be aware of it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Very good point. Thank you. Yeah, it does lend itself to that kind of discussion. Yeah, and I think Johnny and Deanna will be touching on that tomorrow. Yes.
Morning.
Morning.
We as teachers, we are always following educational trends and tendencies, new tendencies. We were told in 2015 to follow the, noticing educational methodology. So we put all those grammar structures aside, and we forgot about teaching that as a subject or in language arts teaching, and we are trying to connect or to attract our students just to know, just to like English, and that's another reason to forget about grammar, syntax.
Now, let me stop you there. First thing, the idea, especially with younger learners, the idea of developing positive attitudes to language learning. That's great. That's good. I did not say forget about grammar, not even for a second. I'm actually very traditional about grammar. I would never say remove grammatical analysis from the classroom. I would even have translation in the classroom. I have drilling in the classroom. I am not going to throw away all of that. What I would say is that if you're going to teach grammar, it needs to be linguistically informed. So that, for example, if an intermediate learner says to you, teacher, you have taught us, I haven't got anything. And you say, yes. And they say, okay, because teacher, last night I was playing a video game and the person I was playing with said, I ain't got nothing. Is I ain't got nothing? Is it wrong or is it right?
It's just used.
It's just used. But how in itself, that's not a terribly helpful answer for a student who's genuinely confused. But if you have the confidence in your own disciplinary knowledge to say, okay, there is a distinction between what is standard and what is appropriate for other contexts, there are differences in register. The concept of grammaticality covers both standard and non-standard varieties. It is just as grammatical to say, I ain't got nothing, or as I would say, I ain't got no. It is just as grammatical to say that as it is to say, I have not got anything. It's rule-driven, it's rule-governed, it's regular, which is what rule-governed means. There's nothing irregular about it. It's just non-standard. And if you can help your students understand what a standard language is, and the difference between standard and non-standard, the difference between registers, the difference between how language is used in different social contexts, you will help them not only with their English, you'll help them with their Spanish, you'll help them with their knowledge of the world. But you can only answer that question from a linguistically informed viewpoint. I'm definitely not saying throw away grammar.
Yeah,
no.
Because one of my 11th graders came to me and said, at Sena, teacher, they are asking for grammar structures. They are asking for, verb tenses.
Yeah.
Why don't you teach us
Well,
tenses?
fair question.
And I had to.
Yeah.
I had to.
Fine.
Because Sena has a different way to teach their English.
Yeah. And again, I suspect strongly that, again, we're talking about decisions that are being made by people who don't have a background in language sciences and don't really know what they're talking about. I suspect.
I have noticed that some of us as teachers, we satanized, for example, verb to be.
Yeah.
Completely satanized. And some students, they don't know how to use, that person's, the subject with the character.
No, I think this goes back to what Tito said. I mean, you have to give them a firm base of the standard grammar. Absolutely. Also, they have to pass exams. You have to give them this. But I'm saying a linguistically informed approach to language teaching goes beyond that.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's no more questions, thank you again for your attention and thank you for your company for the last couple of hours, and I'll see you later on in the day.
Thank you, Tim, for your presentation. I thank Dr. Tim Marr, thank you very much. I think one of the aims of this conference is reflection, and I think you hit the point there. I would like to invite you now to take a nice refreshment, as well as signing up for the workshops. The refreshment is on your right as you exit the auditorium, and the workshops, signing up for the workshops are on the left. And up next, we're going to have Gustavo with his presentation as well. So we meet here back again in 20 minutes, please. 20 minutes. Thank you.